Welcome back. In this lecture, I want to talk about something that is too little talked about, but makes a very big difference to how you understand the whole subject of Greek philosophy. And that is, well, it comes in two parts. The first part is, who were the Greeks? Where did they come from? What were the origins of their civilization? And the second thing is, what did the Greeks believe? Not in terms of philosophy, but in terms of their background religious belief. I want to first talk about where did the Greeks come from, because it's a complicated question. And until recently, it hasn't been very clear. Thus, there was two tendencies really, in the early discussions of the Greeks. The first was to assimilate them very much to the Northern European civilizations, or later civilizations. To think of them as a precursor to later Europe. The second idea was to think of the Greeks as related more to the East. And it was only until recently that we've had DNA evidence of the Greeks that is sufficient to allow us to resolve this issue. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute. I first want to show you the map of the early Greek settlements so that you can get an idea of how extensive they were. Now, here is the map. Now, what I want you to notice is that the areas in red are all of the areas of Greek settlement. You can see mainland Greece, well settled. You can see southern Italy. You can see the coasts of Sicily. You can see all the way over into Spain. There are settlements. Now, the thing to obviously notice here is that all of these are coastal settlements. The Greeks were a maritime population. They were from the Neolithic period, from around 4000 BC. The Greeks were spreading via shipping. They could sail the Mediterranean and the Black Sea very easily, not without accident, of course, but very easily. And they then settled on these coastal regions. So we have them all around the Black Sea and all around the Mediterranean, at least on the on the eastern part of the Mediterranean, stretching, of course, over into the west in Spain, but mostly concentrated in the east. So they established cities, Greek-speaking cities, in all of these red areas. And they became important settlement areas for the Greeks. And they traded with the peoples who were non-Greek speaking, who were inland, farmers, makers of goods, for example, pots, anything that could be made, traders in metals. All the things that could be made and traded were traded through these Greek cities across the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. So we have a vast culture, a maritime culture, which is built on trade links across all of these areas where the Greeks made settlements, built cities, and then traded with the local peoples. And as far as we know, they did this entirely peacefully, so that all of these trade links did not seem to have or to upset the local populations, but were welcomed by them. Now, of course, many of these local populations then became incorporated into the Greek cities. So you have people who are from Anatolia, from the Caucasus, from the Ukraine, as far away as France. All of these peoples would become mixed into the Greek world as the Greeks settled all of these areas. So the Greeks were not entirely a homogeneous people. They were a core people, but they had multiple cities which would then become, to varying degrees, mixed. The area of the Black Sea is called the Pontic Greeks, the Pontic Greek cities. These Pontic Greeks were an important part of this early Greek civilization. For example, you can see on the map that there is this city, Sinope. Well, Sinope is the home of Diogenes of Sinope. Now, Diogenes was a famous philosopher because he lived in an orange barrel under a bridge, I think, in Athens. So he moved across. The movement across all of these areas was fairly free. So one can't imagine the Greeks as restricted to what we now call Greece. It wasn't. The Greeks were in southern Italy, Spain, southern France, northern Africa, all across the Pontic Sea, both in the southern coast of it and in the north and in the west, all through Georgia. And all of these areas, and down, of course, into Ephesus and Miletus, all around there. All of these areas were populated by Greek speakers, and at any time they were free to move to other parts of these Greek cities. If they were philosophically minded, they might move to Athens because of the academy. But they were part of this. They were not strangers to the Greek Empire. Now, an early testament to this stretching of the populations across from what we think of as Greece is contained in the saga of Jason and the Argonauts, which you may remember from childhood. Jason sails to a place across into the Pontic Sea for the Golden Fleece. Now, the important thing to understand about this is that Jason is not on a quest to find the Golden Fleece. That's not the story. He's not looking for it. He knows where it is. He knows where it is because it's part of the Greek world of where it is. It's in Colchis, which is a city, an ancient, in what is now Georgia. So Jason assembles his crew, which includes Orpheus, and sails to Colchis through the Black Sea. Eventually, when he gets to Colchis, he finds, with the help of Medea, he finds where they are keeping the Golden Fleece, and he steals it with Medea's help. And then he takes it back with him, with Medea, to the Peloponnese. That story is testimony to the extension of the Greek world through the Pontic regions, where the gods themselves have reach, because the gods are directing Jason in this and are guiding and are at every step giving him the support of the gods for his stealing of the fleece. And by the way, the golden fleece is not a piece of mythology. In some sense, it really existed. The golden fleece was, in reality, a fleece which was full of gold flecks. And it came from the fact that in the Caucasus, north and south of the Caucasus, the rivers that ran through, that fed into the Black Sea, were rich in gold. And so in the sort of streams of these rivers, the people would use a fleece from a sheep to sift the gold. The gold would become stuck to the strands of the fleece, and it would, having caught it, they would then use the gold. There is, in fact, a gold, one can say, a gold medallion or a brooch piece, I'm not sure how one would describe it, of two men with a fleece between them, in a sense, with the fleeces draped into a stream, and they are sifting the stream for gold. And the whole thing is made of gold. So the golden fleece is not something made of gold. It was in reality a fleece on which gold had adhered through this process of sifting through the rivers. And Jason takes it back with Medea, and of course, all tragedy breaks loose from that single decision. And the gods are directing Jason and Medea in all of this. The gods are orchestrating it. So they're orchestrating the later tragedy. And one has to remember that. The completely besotted love that Medea forms for Jason is the work of the gods. At any rate, that shows you the degree to which even a far-flung region such as Colchis in Georgia was connected to the Peloponnese of what we think of as the sort of the main part of Greece. They were not separate; they were connected, and there have been Greek finds all around in all of these settlement areas that we're seeing. Greek helmets, Greek inscriptions, etc. So all of this is verified by archaeology. This is an extensive trading network. In the case of the Golden Fleece, it's an extensive theft network that stretches across into the Pontic coastal regions and all through the Peloponnese, southern Italy, and on into southern France and Spain. Everything that the Greeks were doing was dependent upon this wider trading network. Okay, now that gives you an idea of who the Greeks were. They were not a single localized population in the Peloponnese. They were widespread. Now we have DNA evidence to support all of this. The Neolithic period was the original period for the extensive settlement of the Peloponnese. That's around 4, 5,000, 6,000 BC. And it came from Anatolia, from the areas just south of the Black Sea. That population was then added to by an amount. It's unclear the extent of this amount. It was not an invasion, but it was an infusion of settlers, probably females, from northern regions in the Middle to Late Bronze Age. So the Mycenaean period saw settlements from the north into the Greek areas of the Peloponnese. And then finally, there were, because of these extensive trading networks, there were then people coming in from various regions all through the Iron Age, which is the first millennium BC. All of these people contributed to this Greek world that we understand. So that is who the Greeks were. They were most heavily dependent upon, this may be a surprise, they were most heavily dependent genetically on what is called the Iran Neolithic, the settlement in the western northern part of Iran in the Neolithic period, before the Persians, as we now would think of them, who were connected to the settlers, the people in the Caucasus, Georgia, all through the Caucasus, and down into Armenia, Anatolia. Those people were the dominant genetic source for the Greeks, with some infusion from the north. It could have even come from the north part of the Pontic, the northern coast of the Pontic Sea. It could have come. So what you have is a heavily Anatolian infused population forming the origin of the Greeks, with then multiple sources of admixture, minor admixture, entering into these Greeks. Now that's important because it gives us some idea of what were the Greek beliefs. What were their religious beliefs? Most people think that they know this, and I have to say they don't. And what I'll show you in the next part is what the Greeks, importantly, did believe. So let's then talk about the origin of Greek religion, or at least one origin for it. The original god for the Pythagoreans, the Platonists, and others was a god you may never have heard of, a god called Phanes, Phanes, Phanes. Phanes was the first god born from a cosmic egg. Male god, clad in a helmet, entwined by a snake. And Phanes, through various mythologies, gave birth to light, whereas Phanes' either daughter, in some versions, or wife in other versions, gave birth to Night and was called Nyx, N-Y-X. Now that name may be familiar to you because I mentioned it all the way back in the lectures on Parmenides. Remember that Parmenides goes to the goddess, and I said the goddess was unnamed, but was thought by many, to be the goddess Nyx, the goddess of night, because of the description of how he comes to arrive there. Now, Nyx was related in some way to Phanes, either, as I said, either wife or daughter, and together, Phanes is the god of day, Nyx is the god of night. They create successors to them, which eventually give rise, through a long process, to Zeus, who then gives up his kingship of the world to Dionysus. And Dionysus has, as his prophet, his messiah, not sure how you can say this, but his acolyte, however you want to say it, Orpheus. So this is often called the Orphic theology or the Orphic cosmology, and it dominated in southern Italy particularly, and therefore it dominated among the Pythagoreans. You could say that this is their theological background, the background of their view of the origin of the cosmos, rather than the thing which everyone learns about, that there are Olympian gods, Zeus and the rest of them, and that these are somehow the important gods for the Greeks. Not true. The Olympian myth is one set of gods and one mythology that is in competition with other mythologies, and the Orphic mythology is the main competitor. The Orphic mythology, based on Phanes, is fundamental because it leads to the kingship of the world not being had by Zeus, but by Dionysus. Dionysus becomes the major figure in Greek religious life. Worshipped, as they said at the time, worshipped all over Greece and worshipped by many. Many representations of Dionysus in sculpture all over the ancient world. And his legacy survives much longer. There aren't very many representations of Zeus, but there are a lot of Dionysus. He becomes entangled with other figures, Mithras, with Heracles, becomes a sort of version of, or related to in some way to Dionysus, but not the same. But they become absorbed into one mythology on the journey of the Argo, when the Argonauts go to get the Golden Fleece. I said that Orpheus is a member of the crew, suggesting that this is a very ancient journey. Well, Hercules is there as well. he drops out at some point, but he starts off on the journey as well. So you have Hercules and Orpheus, bearers of this tradition, this tradition of the worship of Dionysus, the mystery cults of Dionysus, and these somehow being related back to this original mythology of Phanes. Now, Phanes wasn't just the major figure in southern Italy, or Phanes / Dionysus wasn't the major figure in southern Italy. His coins have been found, coins with his face and name on them, have been found in Ephesus, all the way over in Miletus. Now, this has given rise to lots of puzzles by people. People say, oh, this must be some kind of non-Greek religion, different from, the one that we love, the Olympian tradition. This is all a bad mistake, and it's a common mistake. As I have been pointing out in this lecture, it's a mistake to think of Greece and the Greeks as distinct from the Asian Anatolian world. They're all in it together. One can't say whether Phanes is Greek or whether Phanes is Italian or whether Phanes is Asiatic, that is Anatolian. All of that is a confusion, a view that this is not all one world. So Phanes is crucially important as a religious figure, and the Orphic hymns were composed to Orpheus, which are essentially a conduit to Phanes and other gods who are in this ancient orbit. Because even though we know that the religion of Zeus and some of the Olympians go back to the Mycenaeans, that's clear enough. There are inscriptions which make that clear. Phanes also seems to be very ancient, and it has a larger scope. There wasn't much room for creating a mystery religion out of Zeus and the Olympians. They are really static figures of mythology, but not engaged figures. The difference was, Phanes was not an engaged figure either, but Dionysus was. There were mystery religions that were centered around Dionysus. Now, I have the experience of trying to tell classes about this matter and of really not being believed. Not being believed because people have this very entrenched idea that, oh, Dionysus is nothing other than the god of wine. Dionysus, forget that guy. He's the party god. This is a common view now. Unfortunately, it's completely wrong. It's wrong because there has been this long indoctrination that says the Greeks are simple, they believed simple things, they believed in the Olympian gods, Zeus was the king of them all. This is it. And their philosophies are simple philosophies, which are easily got at. That picture of the Greek world, I don't know how it came about, but it is completely false. And it's because of the connection to the mystery religions. I would say Dionysus is a far, far, far more significant figure than Zeus was to the Greeks. They may have had an idea of Zeus as important, not denying that. All the Olympians are important. But in terms of an active god, in terms of a god that can be worshipped and that can be followed, and that's the crucial thing, a god that can be followed, that status belongs to Dionysus. And Orpheus is, to some extent, his Jesus, his prophet, his singer of his virtues, his devotee. Orpheus as a sort of the one who sings, the one whose music can reach the gods. He is important, and in some ways his story is in some ways caught between the story of Apollo and of Dionysus. For all of this, if you want to understand it, there is a wonderful book by Guthrie, W.K.C. Guthrie, which is called The Orphic Tradition, something like that. I'll put it up here. It's a wonderful book, and it goes through giving you the entire mythology of Phanes and how he comes to, in a long process, creating Orpheus, into creating Dionysus, and how then Orpheus gets linked to this Dionysian cult, because it is a cult. It's a cult as opposed to merely a mythology. It's a cult because it has a cultic practice. Now, as I say, this cultic practice was the cultic practice, if they had any, of the Pythagoreans. And because Plato takes over this Pythagorean view, Plato becomes the bearer of this Dionysian Orphic mythology. And this is referred to many times. It's not specifically referred to by Plato in the dialogues for reasons that I will explain when I come to Plato. But it is explained later. Many later Platonists refer to Dionysus, refer to Orpheus, and this theology becomes the background theology to Platonism. Now, it has connections to the Egyptian figures of Osiris and Isis as brother, sister, husband, wife, and their offspring, which is Horus. So it's, in some ways, when the Greeks thought of Dionysus, they often thought of him as being Osiris. So there was a connection between the Egyptian theology, and by the way, this is another mistake that's often made, and it's in some ways a weirdly duplicate mistake to the mistake made about the Greeks. It's often thought that the really important god of Egypt was Ra. But that's almost like an analogy to Zeus. The important god, the cultic god for the Egyptians, was Osiris, at least for certain parts of Egypt, more than others. Abydos was the center of worship for Osiris. The Osiris, Isis, Horus mythology is a replica of the idea of Dionysus. Dionysus, though, never has a wife, so it doesn't duplicate that aspect. But there is an aspect of the judger of life, the ruler over the underworld, which is shared by Osiris and by Dionysus. He's an underworld figure in many ways, which is why he's a cultic figure. You go to him to understand how to live, what to do to appease the gods, how to find your way into heaven. That's the role that the cultic god has. Zeus doesn't have that role really ever. He is almost like a sort of a picture on the wall, Zeus. He's a static image. Not so, and same with Ra, not so with Osiris and Isis and Horus. They're all figures of active worship, of an active cult. You worship then to know how to live now in the present, what to do. They will intervene perhaps for you. That's the same role that Dionysus has. You follow Dionysus. The Bacchae, the Bacchic women, are the followers of Dionysus. They go into an ecstasy of Dionysus worship. Dionysus fills them. Now, I say this with some caution, but you will, I think, have picked up by now that this relationship between Dionysus and Osiris and Isis and that mythology, these mythologies from Greece to Egypt, has its reflective image in ideas in Christianity about God and Jesus and the relationship between them. I'll say no more about that. You can examine it yourself. But for the Greeks, it was an important matter. Now, because these the coins to Phanes have been found in Ephesus, I think it's unclear where this originated, but then it's unclear where worship of the Olympians existed. Where did that originate? Was it also from Anatolia? It could well be. There is a strong analogy between certain Hittite gods and Zeus. That the story of the birth of Zeus by I think it's Kronos, who is given a stone. He's trying to eat his children. He is given a stone by his wife, and he then vomits up the stone. That is mirrored in Hittite mythology and in the Olympian mythology. So is that Asiatic? Is that Anatolian? Possibly. I think it's an important thing to understand that it's quite possible, because of the genetic origins of the Greeks in Anatolia, that much of that mythology may have been carried with them. There may be no such thing as an indigenous Olympian mythology for the Greeks. It's just as likely that the original mythology was the Phanes/Dionysian mythology, because Dionysus also is known to go all the way back to the Mycenaean Greeks. He is not a new god who they are suddenly worshipping in some kind of late Iron Age period. No, he goes back to the Bronze Age. This was the fact that Dionysus is early, although it may not have been clear to Nietzsche, that the earliness of Dionysus, the way in which he becomes the god of dance, of ritual, of joy, of a sort of a wellspring of life, that seems to have been a very important aspect for Nietzsche, who in his later period even identified himself with Dionysus. I'll come to that later. But for the Greeks, it's important to know this. For the Greeks, Dionysus and the religion that comes from the creator god Phanes is a much more important thing for Plato and the Pythagoreans than the Olympians. And it's because they are active gods, because we can connect with them through ritual, through our behavior, through how we worship in the cultic sense, that they have that importance. So throw out all that you thought you knew about the Greeks and their fascination with the Olympians and their concerns about that. That was all a nonsense story. I don't know how it ever got to be a story that was told to everyone. Guthrie's book is not recent. This has been known for a long time. It's completely obscure to me why this part of the story has been left out, but left out it has been. One final thing. There are hymns or Orphic hymns that have come down to us from the Greeks. They show the importance of the Greeks, the way these hymns worked as imprecations to the gods. Here is one, the 30th hymn of Orpheus. This is to Bacchus, that is to Dionysus. Bacchus, I call loud-sounding and divine, inspiring God, a twofold shape is thine. The various names and attributes I sing, O firstborn, thrice-begotten Bacchic king. Rural, ineffable, two-formed, obscure, two-horned and with ivy crowned, and union pure, bull-faced and martial, bearer of the vine, endued with counsel prudent and divine, O Medius, whom the leaves of vines adorn, of Jove and Proserpine occultly born, in beds ineffable, all blessed power, whom with triennial offerings men adore. Immortal demon, hear my suppliant voice, give me in blameless plenty to rejoice, and listen gracious to my mystic prayer, surrounded with thy choir of nurses fair. That contains a lot of the Dionysian mythology, and you can hear how in this, as in all of the Orphic hymns, the Greeks are asking for guidance from this god. They do the same with other deities, but not so much. There are some overlaps between the deities in the Orphic Dionysian Phainic mythology and the Olympians. There's some overlap, but to a large extent, what we have here, this cultic forms, lasted hundreds and hundreds of years, all the way into the period which we call AD. These cults did not go away anytime soon. They were still there, and they had to be eventually stamped out forcibly by Christianity, as you would expect. Okay.